Hi, I'm Penny Bradley, and I was a pilot in Nachtwaffen and in Kruger in different altars. I was first abducted when I was 4 years old, and I spent 55 years away from my family, and I was age regressed and returned to them in a short enough period of time that they never knew I was gone. In my life with my family, I was a National Merit Finalist in 1973. I graduated junior college in 1974 with an AA in mathematics. I spent a couple of years getting married and getting stabilized, and then went to San Diego State for 3 semesters, where I had to drop out because I had lupus, which was related to my time in space. When I was first kidnapped, I was traveled cross-country in a Jeep at night and ended up at Langley, Virginia, and they kept me most of 5 years. The first year or so, they spent mind fracturing me. And when that was completed, they took me to Montauk for about 6 months, testing me in the chair. The people that were running it were really upset because I would go multidimensional rather than traveling in time like they wanted me to. There was a Draco warrior that was supervising the process, and when the humans wanted to kill me, he just stepped forward and said, "No, I'll chip her. And when she leaves, I'll hunt her down." And while it did further enslave me, it saved my life. He said I was more valuable than the rest because I could go multidimensional. And actually, that's the skill that made it where I could be a pilot and navigator. Because when we do the warp jumps, you have a setting for each dimension of space, 2 of time, the time that you leave and the time that you return to, and then the Q setting, which is for which dimension you travel through. And you have to be psychic enough to make sure that you're not going to come back inside a planet or a sun or something like that. So that was why the Draco wanted to save me, because he knew I had that ability. So after Montauk, I was taken back to Langley, where my abilities were weaponized. When I was 9, I went through the Mars jump gate in New York, and it looks like an elevator in a skyscraper. You step in, and there's one set of panels for going up and down the building, and another set that you open with a slider that takes you to Mars. And the walls morph like you're in a wormhole, and it took about 20 minutes to get there. And we came to Ares Prime, or Ares Prima, as they called it in the German colony. It was more a base than a colony, but there were colonists there. And I was put into school with the German kids. And I was in the Schule for 10 years. And I was 19 when I graduated and was put behind the wheel of a fighter jet. I was part of a unit of women pilots that they called the Valkyren, which translates into the Valkyries. And I didn't know what my real name was. They were calling me Penelope, and we used my unit name as my last name. So that altar was called Penelope Valkyren, and she was a second lieutenant. Most of my duties were air support for the war against the Raptors, which the Germans started. And I'd occasionally be sent to capture a mantid for intel. And they usually ended up getting me eaten by a spider. And the spiders on Mars are like 15 feet across. Then I got into trouble on Mars in about 1990. I had an affair, and I got sent out to take out a raptor nest, and they were having him for dinner. And I lost it, and the ship interpreted that as fire all weapons. And while I destroyed the nest like I was supposed to, I was way overkill. And the Marische Heimschild, the Martian militia there, decided I was too unstable to be trusted with those kinds of weapons. And so I was transferred to Nachtwaffen, which is the German fleet. And I was hooked into the ship's computer, and that's the way I lived for 25 years. We had 3 navigators on the ship that worked shifts, and I was never allowed off the ship until it was time to come home. I had my room that I shared with another woman navigator, and I was allowed there, and the officer's mess, and my workstation, and the corridor in between. So I was basically a prisoner for 25 years because of that. And I was sent back in 2014. The mind fracturing techniques were taken from the Bavarian Illuminati, or what most Americans know as satanic ritual abuse. It's the idea is that if you torture an adult, they go catatonic or just scream forever, or they die, and you have lost a useful asset. If you torture a child, it forms a bubble in its mind that stores the trauma away from the main personality. And they can create endless numbers of these through torture. And then later on program those bubbles to be personalities with their own. Some of them even think they're a different gender from the body. They can speak different languages, be taught different skills, but they don't share memory. So if you want someone to commit a major crime and you don't want them to be able to testify against you for setting them up for it, then this is the perfect alibi, because that way the person who's actually doing the crime doesn't even remember doing it or who told them to do it. This is the classic MKUltra description of the Manchurian candidate that goes through and is a perfect person and then suddenly kills a bunch of people. So the techniques. The original techniques were rape and sodomy. And the sodomy of a child, their pelvis looks like a butterfly, and that's where the Monarch group got their name is from children's pelvises. And they took it to the extreme that they even put butterflies in the child's mouth while they're doing it. It's graphic and rough, and the CIA has added to that drowning, electrocution, nailing children inside walls and letting them suffocate, shooting them with bullets, shooting them with energy weapons, putting them in a small cell and letting them starve. What else was done to me? Drowning. Later on, when I was being weaponized, if I didn't perform to standards, I would be electrocuted. And I'm not talking about a taser or a cattle prod. I'm talking about an electric chair. They had a regeneration tank so that when they killed us, they could bring us back with full memory of them having killed us. The end result was not only did they have the 13 by 13 by 13 cube of bubbles or altars that Stuart Swerdlow describes, but they also taught us, you can't die. We won't let you die. You can die all you want, but you don't get to stay dead. So there is no fear of death. Actually, most of us kind of welcome the eventual death because that's the only freedom we ever get. And the other thing is that since death is not an option, we have to do what we're told without questioning or arguing. Most of the altars have no ethical compass at all. So they're basically a blank slate that holds the memory of a torture. And they fill it with whatever they want. And generally anything like ethics or values or caring about people is not what they want you to have. I've been reintegrating my altars through shamanic soul fragment retrieval. And I've had to work really hard to make sure that Penny stays on top, because I'm the only altar that has an ethical compass. And I don't want to do this only to become a monster. I've worked really hard. I've reintegrated 30 altars, and I've kept the one with an ethical compass on the top. And I've been working with an Iroquois shaman to do this. So when I start to get into trouble, he can help me.
Could you take a moment and describe the appearance of the chair? You mentioned a chair. I don't know if it was Montauk with the CIA.
Montauk.
Okay, can you explain what that chair looks like and what it does?
It looks like an old style airplane seat, and it's an almond color, and it has electrodes where your shoulder blades would be. I was short enough that I was 6 when they put me in it. They had to put me on a peach box for my shoulders to reach the electrodes. And they strap you in, and they turn on the tunnel. And you're facing the tunnel. And the tunnel forms a wormhole. And the target that they want you to reach is at the end. And you're supposed to stay in the middle and focus on the tunnel, because the sides of the wormhole form loops and they reach in and grab at you. And if one gets you, you end up off on another stream. And it's really hard. In those days, it was really hard for them to find you. So they would get really pissed if you didn't follow directions. And we went after mind fracture. So they had us to the point we were desensitized to a lot of the things that they used on us. And they call us disassociates because we have completely disassociated from a lot of things. Feelings. I went years in this life on earth just numb because I was a disassociate. I raised my kids in that state. I only came out of it in 1990 through healing of memories at church. And that's basically, you go to a session every week and it's an exorcism every week. And I went for 2 years. I've been subjected to over 100 exorcisms because of being a disassociate. At some point that becomes spiritual abuse. And so I know for a fact that exorcism does not work whenever you're dealing with altars. It just doesn't work. You're just adding more abuse to the poor victim that's already gone through all this crap.
Can I interject, please?
Sure.
So when I was 6 years old, my dad came home from work and I was sleeping in my bed and I was levitating up and down my bed. And then my dad got his Bible out and prayed over me to get the demons out of me. And he said, I guess I never had that problem again. Do you think that was perhaps that was an altar that came out and then he scared the shit out of it by trying to convince it was a demon?
It's possible. It's also possible that there was a cloaked person or ET, as in physical non-terrestrial life form, that was cloaked and was trying to move you and realized they were caught and left.
Have you ever experienced anything like that where you levitated or had any kind of super psychic abilities that manifested through an altar?
I've had some pretty dramatic psychic abilities. I have not levitated in my earth life. I've watched other people do it. My Iroquois shaman can do it. And I've watched him float along this far off the floor, just floating. And I'm like, I know how to do that. I just can't pull it off. And so I know in space I've done it, but not here. I've read people's thoughts, and I've projected where other people were reading mine. More or less, I was putting my thoughts in their heads. And once I realized that's what I was doing, I've worked really hard to not invade people's minds. What is it? Randy Kramer describes it as the blue helmet, to keep your own thoughts in your own head.
When were you first aware that you had DID?
I was 7 years old.
And were you taken to a doctor and given diagnosis, or did somebody just think that you had it? Or
My father locked me inside a closet with black widows and left me there for half an hour. And I came out with another personality that I named Louise. And she could do whatever Daddy wanted so that I didn't get into trouble anymore.
And do you think the way your family treated you as part of your initiation process through the trauma of actually maybe mind fracturing you even further?
I think my family were too young for the responsibility of the 5 kids they had. They got married. My mom was 16 and my dad was 19, and they were what's normally called poor white trash. and they had 5 kids in 8 years and didn't make enough money to support us, and the pressures got to them. I think it was, my mother has alters, so it's possible that she had some sort of handler role, but I think it was more the cult that I grew up in was based on severe mind control, and they were just passing on what they had been raised with. So they were more efficient about mind fracture than the CIA because they didn't have to use sexual abuse to do it.
Have you ever confronted your father about what he did when he locked you in that closet, or your mother about how she may have treated you?
My father died in 1980 of heart problems. He died following quadruple bypass surgery, and I had informed him that I thought he was abusive. And he had said, well, I did the best I could. My mother is still alive and still abusive, and I've broken contact with her for my own mental health.
Okay, could you comment a little bit more about Montauk? In particular, what did the time tunnels look like? And also, how long were you at Montauk?
I was there about 6 months, and it was not the official Montauk program. It was a, a field trip. It was part of the CIA process. It was, you went through mind fracture, you went to Montauk in the chair to see who could operate the chair, because not everyone can. And then they took you back to weaponize you. This was a 3-step process. And when I was there, everybody did it. Apparently, so many girls went multidimensional like I did, that when they set up the actual Montauk project, they only had boys. And I may be part of the reason why.
Why did the girls go interdimensional as compared to the boys?
It seems to be a property of the gender. When they modified us to have greater psi abilities, it seems that the girls would go dimensionally.
And where did you go through when you traveled down this Montauk tunnel? And can you describe what it looked like?
It looks, when it's off, you're too young to remember the TV show, The Time Tunnel. They showed it. When it's off, it's just black and white stripes. When it's on, it's this energy that it's like a gray and white and black stripes that are alive, and they wiggle and they reach for you, and you have to avoid them. And then if you're not paying attention to the target, you'll see the tunnel branching, and you'll get sucked down a branch. And that gets scary because they don't always find you right away, which I was trying to get away from them. So they didn't know there are portals between dimensions, that you can travel through the same wormhole if you know they're there. And I was trying to escape from them, so I would find the portal. The chair doesn't go by a computer program. They have a program to run the wormhole in the tunnel, but it operates by the psychic ability of the person in it. And boys are more left brain and more linear because of the testosterone. And girls are more right brain and intuitive and more likely to see the portals between the dimensions. Now, different portals go to different places, so you're kind of taking potluck where you're going to end up. But it's better than being tortured anywhere out there. As long as you're going up, anywhere is better than Langley was. The place I went through time was a general store in about 1888, and I was supposed to steal an apple from a display basket and not get caught and not eat it and come back with it. They were testing the butterfly effect to find out how much they could change time in the past without changing the present. And I was supposed to report on what had changed in between, so that they would, was somebody missing, that sort of thing. The other places I went, I went somewhere that was like being in a kaleidoscope. I don't know what level it was or what it was supposed to be, because my brain interpreted it as just light meshing together. And they found me there right away, pulled me back. There was another place I went that felt very physical, but the people were orcs and wore brown clothes, and they were very kind to me because my clothing didn't come with me. So my clothing was still in the chair and I wasn't, and I would be naked when I got there, and they would bring out some sort of blanket and wrap it around me. I was a lot smaller than they were, and they treated me very kindly. So the way people describe orcs in some of these games, like they're horrible monsters, I didn't experience that. But they're an other dimensional race. Those are the two places I remember. I mean, this was a long time ago. I have seen creatures that look like eyeballs that fly under their own power, and they're carnivorous. I've seen a flower that is neon white with blood red veins for the plant and through the leaves, and the petals are blood red, and the face side of it is a black portal contact point. That's not the right word. It's anyway, if you get sucked into it, you have no idea where you're going, and the plant will feed off your energies.
Okay, what do you think can be done to integrate trauma, such as yourself that's gone through Montauk?
Well, I've been using Native American shamanic soul fragment retrieval, and I haven't been using entheogens. I've been sliding into a trance without drugs, and it's similar to meditation, but it's deeper, and it's a cross between meditation and out of body. And you're there and you're in there, and you call your altars to you, and the ones that are ready will come, but you have to make sure that it's actually the right frequency to be you, and it will appear with a face. And you have to make sure that face matches yours to make sure it's actually you, because there are a lot of alters floating around in space, in other dimensions, fragments from past lives, and there are beings that will try to join you just so they're no longer floating. There are ghosts and other things out there, and you want to make sure it's actually you. And then you call them in, and it's not physical, but it's like you embrace them and bring them in. And then you sit in the mind together and share memory this time, and you slowly merge together. And that's the dangerous point, because if they're more dominant than you are, they can take over. Between Mind Fracture and Montauk, my generation, 95% of the kids died. I mean, not just being killed and then revived. It was they were in such bad shape that even after they were revived, they were unusable. And they had to be basically euthanized because they were beyond.
Did they replace these children with clones, or did they just go missing, like the milk carton kids?
They just go missing.
So why is it that you think that you survived and they didn't?
Well, I was DNA modified, and it may have made me stronger. And I think that what you are at soul level makes a difference, because not everybody is an advanced enough soul to survive it.
Why don't you talk a little bit about your relationship with this Draco? Like, what did he look like? What was his name, his role? And
I didn't know his name. He basically just stood in the corner or sat in the corner, because he was 12 feet tall. He sat in the corner and observed until they were ready, mad enough to kill me. And he said, "No, I will chip her and I will go get her." He was brown. He was 12 feet tall, broad. He was a warrior class, so he was descended from a turtle, so they still have the turtle shell on their backs. And he had a deep voice. He had claws. I should have been scared of him, but I wasn't. And I was more scared of the humans that were there. And he was... I don't know what he intended. You know, I was 6. It was just this big guy in the corner decided I was worth saving. And at the time, I was grateful.
did they ever look into your future? Or were you able to look into your own future to see what may have happened? The reason why you maybe get some insight on why they targeted you? Or
I know that they did a past life regression on me to find out what kind of ET I was in the past. Most humans have been something else in the past. So they went back some in my incarnation tunnel. They tried to get tech out of me. Some of my past lives I remembered after I came back, probably because of that. But when I came back and tried to tell my parents about it, they beat me for lying.
All right, so I guess now we're going to go on to Mars. Maybe you can talk about, so at what point, I mean, why did they actually bring you to Mars? Did they realize that you weren't going to be usable at Montauk? Can you explain a little bit about that process?
Mars was where I was supposed to be sent. The agreement between the Germans in Antarctica and the United States government was that 150,000 kids would be provided to them every year. And for 1959, I was one of those kids. So they had set up Ares Prime, and they had started a war so that they could have a better place to put a colony. And it had gotten way more difficult than they thought it would be. The Raptors were a more difficult opponent than they had expected, and the Mantids still had space flight. So they had some significant weapons, and at least at the beginning. And they had determined by the time I was 9 that I would be a pilot/navigator. And they had given me star charts in my head and things like that. So that was where I was supposed to go, was Mars.
How did you get these star charts in your head?
I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly. Because they're not flat images. They're 3D, holographic.
Do you recall the process of intelligence acceleration, any kind of tools or technologies they may have used to enhance the human psyche?
I haven't thought about that one before, how they did it. They have a lot of tech that they don't explain to us. When I was at Langley, there were Naga involved in the process there. I'm not sure exactly what they did. There was one Naga that was kind to me, and she was the only being at Langley who ever was. I don't know how they got them in my head, but I know the star charts are there.
When you were on Mars, did you miss planet Earth and your family? What?
I had been mind wiped before everything. So I had no memory of Earth or my family. And I only spoke rudimentary English when I got to Mars, and they immediately put me into German immersion. And in German school, Schule, it was Prussian style, where you recite everything out loud after the teacher, and even when you start writing, you're reciting while you're writing. Everything was out loud, and if you said it wrong, you got the ruler on the fingers, and Prussian style.
Were you given an adopted family to take care of you during this time?
No. The group of us who survived Langley were in a barracks together, and we were responsible for keeping our uniforms in tip-top shape so that we would be able to pass inspection every day. And my head had been shaved continuously while I was at Langley, so I had to learn how to take care of hair because they wanted it to grow out on Mars. And we were in Schule for 6 hours a day, and then we spent 3 hours in the gardens that provided food for the colony. My uniform was a brown drindle skirt, a white shirt with a Peter Pan collar. There was a brown cardigan sweater. These really dorky tie shoes. They weren't exactly Oxfords. They're just dorky looking clodhoppers. And a bow tie, a female bow tie, you know, the pretty ones. The boys they weren't lederhosen, they were regular pants, and they had a pointed collar on their shirts and a Windsor knot tie that was orange. But we were expected to be polite and respectful to the authorities, as in the teacher and the headmaster and any officers who came in. But we were encouraged to bully each other and work out a pecking order. And it was a very aggressive place to be. And the colony kids had a parent to take up for them, and we didn't. But we had weaponized psychic abilities, and they were kind of afraid of us. I was given a firewall when I was sent to Earth. I have to believe my life is in danger or be so angry I'm seeing red, and then I can use them. But on Mars, that was part of the mix. I have had the ability to fry electronics or fry someone's brain inside their head. There was once when the raptors made it into the school cafeteria that I formed a force field big enough to contain at least 30 people. And we were the only ones that survived the attack. They had a time tech where when the adults found us, they were able to travel back in time and pull out the rest of the people. So the memories kind of split between what it was before and what it was after the time travel stuff. But there was a short time that I was actually liked and respected because I had saved people.
Did any of the other German kids bully you?
Of course. That was part of the process. It was a Teutonic society, and you were rewarded for being a shit ass.
Did they ever give you like any injections or weekly scans? Anything like that? Could you describe?
They didn't while I was in Shula. Whenever I got into the plane, there were all these drugs and shots, and it was in performance enhancements. It was intellect enhancements. You had to go into the regen tank at least every other week because the drugs damaged your liver. I turned up pregnant twice, and they dumped me into the regen tank. They read me the riot act, that my genetics, because of the Draco DNA, were not going to be allowed to be part of their gene pool. That's how they put it. That they were encouraging fertility among the normal humans, but those of us who had been DNA modified were not allowed to become part of the gene pool. So that was, and they had a word for me. They called me a Missgeburt, which is basically an abortion that lived. And I have altars that are really deeply triggered by that. Sometimes it pours over into this one. Every ship, every ship has a command center where they have like morning duty call, and behind the podium is the Nazi eagle holding either the design for that planet or moon or whatever it is with a swastika on it, or a schwarze Sonne, the black sun symbol. One or the two, depending on what the highest ranking officer on the ship is. And when I was in Aries Prime, there was one in the command center for the Valkyries, and it had a schwarze Sonne. And that's on the wall behind the podium. And then on the podium itself, there would be some sort of symbol for which force, you know, the unit that was there. Each group had their own, you know, their arm patch.
And did your own uniform contain swastikas on them?
No, I was in a blue uniform. They told me that I was U.S. Navy on loan to them. I did not have swastikas on my uniform. The spoken language was Schwabian German, because when I was back on Earth, I took German, and I took to it real easily, and I had 3 teachers, and they all spoke High German. And when I got through junior college and had a former Luftwaffe officer from Berlin, and he said, "Yeah, I have to give you an A because you've learned it, but how the hell did you get a Schwabian accent from me?" That's their equivalent of hillbilly English. And it's considered a low-class accent. And here I was. I'd had 3 years of German in high school and 2 in college, and I had a Schwabian accent. Well, that's the accent we used on Mars. Nachtwaffen is the real name for what some other people are calling Dark Fleet. A German group would never have an English name. And the Dark Fleet just describes the black ships. Nachtwaffen is the name. And in German, when you go into space, they poetically call it ins der Nacht, which is into the night. So, saying you're going into the night, you become the night weapon, or the space weapon, Nachtwaffen. It's actually pretty when you think about it. They're not uncivilized, they're just Teutonic. I was on Mars for 25 years, and I was in Schule for 10 of it. So I was in active service in a plane for 15 years. And I was active service in a freighter ship for 25.
And at what point, because I know we did a regression, and you said that you may have actually seen one of my duties as a super soldier.
That was a different altar. and she is a Kruger asset, and she is a cyborg, and she has basic awareness, not much more than your average dog would have. All of her higher functions are AI, and she flies a ship. Basically, it looks like the space shuttles from Earth, you know, the ones that used to go to the space station. And she just flies it back and forth between the Earth and Mars and transports troops, transports slaves, transports other cyborgs, whatever, just back and forth. And that she was transporting your team, and I had enough bleed over that I recognized you. Remember when I first met you online, I said, I know you, but you should be taller? So, yeah, I was one of the first people to recognize you? So, yeah, we did a regression last year. Yeah. We did a regression, and first we hit the red wall of self-destruct programming, and you backed me out of that, so you were taking care of me. And we were able to get to a point where my cyborg alter had delivered your team to a base on Mars, and you were getting, your crew was getting out of the shuttle. And in the regression, Penny, I took her over. Normally when I visit an altar, I'm piggybacking, looking through their eyes, but they're still in charge. That particular time, I was taking over, and I was talking to your altar, which irritated him massively, because cyborgs are not supposed to talk to officers. And you had me tell him that I was on Earth, and ask him, I don't remember what you had me ask him, but he got really mad and told me to piss off.
You said something like this: Hi, I'm Penny Bradley, and I'm working with James Rink on a regression, and I'd like to know if you have anything you'd like to tell James Rink. And then what was the response?
Piss off. That's what his response was.
In the most polite way. It was actually a little bit more gruff than that.
Yeah, that's the polite version of what he said. He was like, who do you think you are, talking to me? So,
did a lot of the people on these bases treat each other that way? They're just nasty to each other? Or is there
There is a belief that a cyborg is not a human, even though each cyborg contains a human brain and consciousness. They treat them like they're completely robotic. And the creation of these cyborgs is not volunteer. It's done to you. You are a victim of this. And that organic consciousness is necessary, because most of the ET tech requires a consciousness to operate it. And so they have to put a consciousness in the robot for the robot to be able to use the tech. But then they treat the cyborg as though it's just a machine, and it's not. There's a person in there. And I know that firsthand, because I wake up piggybacking her. And especially after the regression. Before the regression, I just knew some of the things she knew. But since then, I wake up in her at least once a week. So I know what she's doing. And if she had more human awareness, she would probably be miserable, because they work her 24/7. They think that a cyborg doesn't require sleep because it's a machine, and they treat them rudely. And it's like, well, my computer isn't working, let's smack it around a little. They're not kind to them. They don't treat them well. And I would not want to be one. I don't like that one of my altars is in one. Mars looked like the part of northern Arizona that has the really short grasses and stuff, grasses and shrubs, the really short ones, so that you can see the dirt, but there are still plants there. And there's a lot of small animals, mostly insects and reptiles, but there are burrowing mammals. There are burrowing birds about the size of blackbirds, and they're black, and they're about the size of earth blackbirds, but they burrow and they come out all together like bats at sunset, and it's an amazing thing to watch.
What I'm a little confused is NASA says that the atmosphere of Mars is 0.15% oxygen. So what are these creatures breathing? Can you comment a little bit about that?
NASA is lying.
Were you able to breathe the air?
You're able to breathe the air if you're going to be doing something strenuous. You need an oxygen supplement. So most of the soldiers wear an oxygen pack, and it comes across the nose, and it just gives them enough oxygen to come up to par. But it's like Earth at about 8,000 feet. The sky's a light blue unless there's a sandstorm, then it turns red. But it's like being at 8,000 feet. The air's thin but breathable, as long as you're not doing anything too rowdy, and animals survive. The ones on Mars have adapted to the cold, mostly by burrowing, and the insects and reptiles are cold-blooded, so they just go dormant at night. And they require less oxygen and less food. So they've done quite well surviving in the conditions there. In the daytime, at the equator, it gets to about 70 degrees, which is really nice. And at the poles, it's about 50, which is consistent with still temperate zones on Earth. The trouble is the night gets really deadly cold, and you need to have shelter then, or a spacesuit. Even in the equatorial regions, it gets really cold at night. But if you have some sort of a shelter, or you're in a spacesuit, or the soldiers have a suit that's made by Aegis, and it's in between regular fatigues and a spacesuit. And a lot of the soldiers will use that and then have some sort of it's like a tent, but it holds heat better. And so they'll just set up their tent for the night, and they're good till morning. And the day is about 28 hours instead of 24. So things last a little longer. The night's a little longer, the day's a little longer. Sunset's a little longer, which sunset, you get the night sky coming, and then you have this edge right around where the sun is that's lavender, and it's where sunsets on Earth are orange or pink or red. On Mars, it's lavender, and it lasts about an hour.
Do you ever recall seeing any kind of trees or larger plants, maybe in the equatorial regions?
Actually, the trees are at the poles. It snows at the poles, and in the springtime, it all thaws and deeply waters the plants. The South Pole in particular has huge forests that are like similar to junipers, only the leaves are thicker. And that was one of the things that was in my presentation about Mars, was the rover photos of the forests. And there was a polar satellite probe that took pictures. The South Pole has tremendous forests.
Did you ever see any large organisms, such as giant spiders or crickets, dinosaurs?
There were mantids that were 7 feet tall. There were raptors with human-like arms that were about 7-8 feet tall. They had long claws. In an unarmed fight between a raptor and a human, the raptor will win every time. So would a mantid, because they have two or three digits at the end of their top two sets of arms, and then the bottom set they use as legs. But the fingers are about this long, and they're sharp, and so they're effectively claws, even though they're not. And I've seen mantids, when they're frightened, cut a human in half with those. So a fair fight between the mantids and a human, or a raptor and a human, the human will lose. So when humans tend to go through this cycle where we have tech and then we lose it, when we get to a dark age on Mars, those beings are going to kick us off. That's beyond any shadow of a doubt, unless we exterminate them first, which is always a possibility. We pretty much decimated both races in the Mars War. So, what else did I see? I saw there's a creature there that's like an ichthyosaurus, but it's small. It's not the size the ones on Earth were. It's about 5 foot tall, because it walks on its flippers. And there's lots of snakes. Lots of snakes. And there are spiders that look more like coconut crabs. That's what they actually look like, is coconut crabs, but they're spiders. And they range from 6 feet across to 15 feet across. And they hide out in caves, and they're telepathic with the mantids. The mantids keep them like we do working dogs. Shepherd types, police dogs, sheep herding dogs, they keep them like that. So when the mantids get in trouble, they'll call a spider to take care of the problem, like sicking a dog on them. And when I've chased mantids on foot, they invariably duck into a cave and call on a spider, and I wake up in a regen tank.
Do you actually recall a spider actually killing you?
Yes. They like to bite you in the stomach, and they have 2 sets of mandibles, one over the other. and the venom burns like fire, but it works very, very fast, so it doesn't hurt very long.
Okay, can you describe, first of all, why were you even roaming about the surface chasing these mantoids?
I was under orders.
They didn't give you the right weapons to defend yourself?
I had weapons, but I was supposed to capture them alive. And spiders are fast. You know, you're talking about a large animal that can cover a lot of space faster than you can even notice them. And when you're concentrating on catching one critter and another one comes at you, and they're smart like dogs.
Can you describe what the regeneration tanks look like?
They're 2 meters in diameter. So someone my size cannot touch both edges at the same time. And they're 3 meters tall. So humans float in them. So they're effectively, can't think of the name. The one where you can't, the sensory deprivation tank. They're effectively a sensory deprivation tank. When you're in it, you're on a wire that hooks, I don't know how it hooks into you, but you're on a wire and you're suspended in this green gel. I understand there's a version that has a blue gel, but I always woke up in the green one. And you can't see through it. It's dark, and when you wake up, you're in the dark. And you can't really feel the gel, but it feeds you and breathes through you and absorbs your waste. And it's made from black goo. So they have removed the sentient part and left the programmable part, and so there's a computer. It's about the size of a tablet on the outside, and you set it for age, weight, and to repair whatever genetic problems that you might have, and there's the option of repairing the telomeres, but they don't generally do it. And there are certain things that you can't have in your system when you're in it. One of them's antibiotics, because it's almost a life form. And they have to, anything like chips that you have in you will fall to the bottom of the tank. So they have to reinstall your chips while you're in there, or before they take you out. And it's mantid tech, not the same mantids that we were fighting on Mars. Those were indigenous. The ones that make the regen tanks are the Mantid Empire. There's lots of different kinds of insectoids. There's lots of different kinds of reptilians. There's lots of different kinds of humans, grays. We're talking there are millions of races in the galaxy. So I don't know the official personal name for that group. They're mantids. The ones on Mars had the triangular heads with the eyes at the corners. The ones that make the tanks have more of a grasshopper face. Regeneration tank. That's what we called it.
And is that what they use to re-age you as well?
Yes. They re-age you, and then they put you in a machine to send you back. And it's the machine that sends you back that makes you sick. When you come back, about 20 years later, you end up with an autoimmune disease. So I was sent back to age 4, and at 24, when I was at San Diego State, I was hit with lupus. And I've not been okay since. And the other veterans that I know all get hit with this mess of, it's a mix of arthritis and autoimmune and endocrine shutdown and heart problems. And it starts 20 years after they sent you back. And if you don't get it, consider yourself lucky. We suspect they do it to us on purpose so we will die before we remember.
Do you wish you could visit Mars again?
You know, NASA came out with that satellite video that showed Mars from near orbit. And I was like, oh my God, that was so pretty. And I sat and cried. I missed it so much. So yeah, if I could go as a tourist, I would love to. If I had to go back to being in Marische Heimschild, no. I've had enough time as a soldier.
Do you feel you should be compensated for everything that was done to you?
It would be nice, but I don't expect to ever get it.
How about an apology?
An acknowledgement that it happened would be nice. A DD-214 so that I could go to the VA for treatment for what is related to my service would be nice. But realistically, I just want them to stop kidnapping more kids. There's nothing we do out there that can't be done by consenting adults. There's no reason to keep doing this. Okay. In the German civilization out there, they found that productivity was improved by sexual activity. So everybody's encouraged to have sex. But it's supposed to be unemotional and no attachments. Just pure animal level sex. And I had this problem that I fell in love with the man. And he had been at Langley with me. I was number 7 and he was number 5. So we had this whole time we had known each other. Came up the ranks together. And his job was to upload documents to the MarsNet in English, German, and Russian. And that's what he did. He wasn't in the war. He was building the MarsNet. And he was seen as somewhat effeminate, where I was seen as somewhat masculine. And so they approved of the relationship until I got attached. And I don't know how he got captured. He was never out of the base. He should never have been captured. But I was assigned to that particular raptor nest, and he was there, and I was actually in love with the man. And the way they have the screens for the pilot set up, you can see the target. You see it like you're in there with them. And I saw him basically in the center of a group of them eating him alive. And this was a man I loved. And it was just, I panicked. And that panic, they They knew from the time that was recorded on my ship's computer what time to go back and rescue him. So he survived. Because I was chipped, connected to the ship's computer, it didn't know how to interpret the panic. And so it decided to fire all weapons into the nest at once. And it completely destroyed it. Now, they used the timestamp on the computer for when they fired the weapons as the target time to go back and rescue him out of... We called it redialing. We would redial to get him out. But they decided... German command decided that I was unstable. So basically my punishment for falling in love was that I was going to be sent off world. And the skills I had meant that I was going to be either a pilot or a navigator for something else. And the ship that I was transferred to had a quantum computer in 1990. And I was stronger chipped to it, so the mind control would be stronger. The MarsNet is the official internet of Mars, and you are given access to the parts you need for your job. It's more like the dark web on Earth than the public internet, because you only get access to what you need for your work. Nobody gets access to everything. You only get this or this or this. You can't just browse. And it was set up into languages because there were different areas, different groups working there. So the main languages were English, German, and Russian. Yes, there was a Russian presence on Mars. But that's what 5 was doing, was uploading all of those documents. And he was very good at it. Most of that information was what other people describe being on their glass pads. So then 5 made the effort to translate those documents into from whatever their source language was into one or all of those 3 languages, depending on security issues. Not everyone had access to everything. And I still don't know why he was out of the base. He shouldn't have been. He wasn't much of a fighter. And, he was damn good at his job. He was too valuable to let him out. I have no idea why he was out. But I ended up on the freighter, and we did a lot of troop transport. We did a lot of slave transport. I remember slaves telling me, "Take us to Earth," which was close enough to the German I understood what they meant. But I would just tell him, "Die Erde ist tot," Earth is dead. That's what I, as a second lieutenant, understood, was that the Earth had been destroyed by a cobalt bomb war. And even though it looked pretty in space, it was dead. It would be a couple of thousand years before we could go back. And that was blamed on an ET race, and that was our rationale for going through and decimating worlds, was we were trying to get even with those ETs. And we were allies of the Draco. And the Draco are generally pretty good to their subject races. All they want are tribute and, loyalty. So when a subject race revolts, they see it as disloyalty and dishonor, and they value loyalty above everything else. And so they go through and they will just destroy the entire place as far as they have to until there's no more resistance, and you are so terrorized you will never resist again. That's their intention. Once they own you forever. And they consider Earth to have been their property in the past because Lemuria was them. So they resented that whole Atlantean thing, and that's a whole nother story. We got radio from Earth. We didn't know it was from Earth, but we got radio from Earth. So when new music came out here, it was like, I remember that. The music would float through, and I remember that. That sounds so familiar. I think we got movies from Earth as they came out, and they were mostly in English with German subtitles, and we didn't get a lot of really hard stuff, but I remember Star Wars being up there, and what else did we have? The food. You have replicator food most of the time. And you take the waste products, the trash, anything that's shabby, all the stuff that would normally go into the dump here goes into the recycling that feeds the replicators. And they literally change it at the molecular level. And there are 7 basic meal plans, and that's what the replicator makes. And you can also get water, you can get coffee, you can get vodka or beer. You can get new uniforms. It's all computer settings, and you tell it your measurements, and it'll make a uniform to match. And shoes, and you put your foot on a pad so it'll get the right shape for the inside, because not everyone's feet are the same. And we were also having ETs in uniforms. We had a lot of worker Draco and Greys that also had uniforms. To supplement the replicators, we also had hydroponic farms, and there was a form of pork that was simply animal cells that we grew, and every so often you'd shave off a layer, and that would be a treat to actually have real food we didn't have farm animals. So whatever meat we had was from cells, laboratory grown. There were 3 basic uniforms, fatigues, blacks, or in my case blues, and dress whites. And for me as a pilot, I would also have a flight suit. And the flight suit was the preliminary stage of something that became a smart suit, which would respond only to your personal DNA and eliminated the need for you to be fed or go to the bathroom. You still had to drink water, but you could go 6 weeks without eating in it. And if you had the helmet on, it functioned as a spacesuit. So that was something for shuttle pilots and the ones that weren't cyborgs. There is an external exoskeleton that the super soldiers use. There's a whole set of things that are made by Aegis for the super soldiers, and they are a heavier suit that's in between fatigues and spacesuits, and an exoskeleton that goes over that, and it can have a helmet or not, and then there's a version for the fighter pilots off of a mothership, and they have a surgically implanted exoskeleton that anchors at the base of the skull and into the SI joints, and that's painful as hell. Money. I don't remember ever having money. I know other veterans talk about money amongst the civilians, that it's gold coinage or a credit system. But I was always military, and it was like all of my actual basic needs were taken care of, and it was like the attitude was I didn't need money. So I don't remember if there was some promise to pay me or not. The cargo, we carried prisoners of war from planets that the Draco were subduing, and we took them to factories where they were converted into cyborgs. The planetary corporations, what some others are calling ICC, are the cabal in space, and they are producing millions of cyborgs a year for sale to ETs. And they're not all human. A lot of them are prisoners of war from these joint projects between the Draco and Nachtwaffen. Either way, it's still a crime to convert a sentient being into a robot without consent. There were other planets that we just destroyed. I remember being asked to use my psychic abilities, my psi abilities, to target weapons because they had an energy shield and we couldn't get a lock on it to target And so they would have me basically remote view to target. And when the weapon hit, the entire planet would blow up. And those are some of the memories I have to live with from Nachtwaffen.
Can you describe what your ship looked like? The one you pilot? Oh, maybe the one that you worked on? Transport?
The one I was a navigator on was older. It was an obsolete version, and it was silver colored, and it was the cigar shaped. And we had panels on the side that would lift, roll back into the hull to allow cargo in. And we had, I think it was 6 cargo holds. These ships are manned by a set of officers and then enlisted men and then slaves. And there are distinct breaks between each of them. And they're set up in teams that are competing. Ours had 3 navigators, and we were set against each other to see who would be most efficient. Now, in navigation, space is like an ocean. It's not empty. It's full of all kinds of free-floating molecules and plasmas from stars, and they form currents that are like electrical streams. And there are space critters that have evolved to feed on that. And they get confused by the energies off of our engines, and they'll come and suck the energy off, so we lose efficiency. So you have to sour the milk about every hour to get the suckers off. And that involves reversing polarities of things, and it makes a couple of minutes that you can't do anything else. So you're just floating along on the momentum you already had while you're playing with the engine to get these things off you. And it has to be done. Some of them are really beautiful, like manta rays from the ocean, and others are just blobs like amoebas, but they all pull the energy off the ship and slow you down or keep you from going into warp drive. Or my ship had a plasma engine and it had an EM drive, and I think it had more than one of each. And we used the old portal system from the builder race. They were 30 feet tall, and so their constructions are rather large and are full. The huge mile-long battleships will go through them with no problem. I think my ship's name was Zollheimen, but I'm pretty sure that it was built probably in the early 1980s, before they went to full black ships. And the Germans are very efficient. They will use, even though they're replacing the technology with new stuff all the time, as long as the old stuff works, it stays in use. It just goes to a lower level. So when the Zollheimen eventually got to where it wouldn't work, it would probably be given to one of the places like Ceres. It wouldn't be decommissioned until you couldn't repair it at all.
All right. Can you describe how it came to an end when maybe the day that somebody came up to you and said, "Oh, by the way, we got to send you back to Earth. We just lied to you."
They didn't tell me I was going back to Earth. They said, "Your tour is over, you get to go home." I had no idea where I was going. So they re-aged me back to 4 and sent me back through the Mars Jump Gate in New York and took me back to California and put me back within 15 minutes of when I'd been taken. Except they didn't put me in my bed. They left me at the doorstep and made it look like I was sleepwalking. And I went back in the house and went to bed. And I woke up that next morning. Because of the initial mind wipe, I had no idea who these people were. And
These people? Who?
My family. I had no idea who they were. I didn't know them. As far as they were concerned, I had amnesia. I didn't speak English anymore. I was speaking German at a 4-year-old level, and my parents spoke only English. Well, my dad also spoke Portuguese, but they were pissed as hell. They didn't believe in amnesia. So, and there was no way I as a child could tell them about mind wipes. And they were very offended. It was a good thing I was smart because I learned English really fast. And I went to kindergarten a couple of months later. And I guess it was about a month into the school year, I told the teacher that Martians had left me on the doorstep. And she accused my mother of me being a foundling. And my mother beat me and told me, "I gave birth to you. I know you're mine." Well, later on, I guess about 4 years ago, when my mom and I were still speaking, I told her, "You remember back then?" And she goes, "Yes." She was still mad. I said, "It was because I was abducted by military, and the military from Mars did bring me back." And her jaw just dropped open, and this was in front of Lou, and she was telling me that I was crazy, that I'd never been abducted, that I had never been gone, that I was just sleepwalking and had an imagination. So.
Well, what did the doctors say to explain your change of language?
They never took me to the doctor. You didn't take kids to the doctor in 1959. The culture has changed tremendously. We were poor people. You didn't go to the doctor unless somebody had a bone sticking out of your arm. My father had his foot cut off in an agricultural accident, and my grandparents soaked it in whiskey and then stitched it back together with sewing thread. This is the kind of family I came from. It might have been 1959, but my family operated almost like it was the 1800s.
So, at what point did you actually recover your memories?
I had some memories all along, but the bulk of them came back in April of 2013 when an NSA agent used my remember code from my CIA programming. The altar that went to Mars was programmed under Wizard of Oz programming. And how he knew to use that remember code on me, I don't know. I don't know his motive for using it. I don't know the NSA's motive for doing it. And I've had a lot of questions about, should I trust it? And I finally came to the conclusion that these are my memories as I remember them. They're too destructive. There are too many atrocities to sit on and keep it quiet. That I am going to act on them, and if it turns out later with some kind of disclosure that this was planted memories, then I'll have to cross that bridge then. But as it stands now, I'm being completely honest. This is what I remember.
Is this person available for other people to contact that helped you, that maybe this person could help other people as well?
That first round table that I did with you and Ileana the Star Traveler and Lindsay Hooper, Ileana uploaded it before you did, and the day after she did, he was murdered.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. There comes a price with being public, and not only was he murdered, but so was his best friend, who was also NSA, and I've been shot 10 times with energy weapons since I started working on the Facebook support group for veterans. So there's a price that goes with helping us. There's a price that goes with being us.
Do you have a book or a website, or maybe even the Facebook group you could recommend people to read or contact?
The Facebook group had to go secret, so you can't find it on a search. You have to be added by a member. So it's invitation only. I have a website, spaceportals.net, and there's an S on the end of portals. I have a new Facebook page that's public. It's Penny Bradley, Nachtwaffen pilot, and I'm including interviews from other people, people from the group that are public. I'm including links to declassified CIA documents, links to free related books in PDF form that are downloadable. I've uploaded the whole set of Bill Cooper's Porterville presentation that was 12 hours. So it's not just me. I'm not vain enough to do that. It's about this whole community of people who have been through similar to what I have. And it's a public point to contact me. I've reached the limit of personal friends that I feel comfortable with. And so I'm not going to be adding a lot more people to my personal wall. It comes down to, do I really want these people to see photos of my grandchildren? And spaceportals.net is a forum site. It's not a blog that I'm writing. It's a place for us to share off of Facebook. And my partner with it is, he owns the server, and only he and I are running the back door of it. So only he and I will get your information, and we formed it because we were tired of Facebook selling our stuff. So we don't even have ads on it right now. We've been paying for it ourselves out of pocket.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell the audience members who are listening at this time?
This sounds insane, If you've never heard of it before or anything like it, you're going to think I'm a paranoid schizophrenic. And I can understand that impression. But if you do your homework, there's plausible evidence between the various CIA documents that are being declassified at this time and some of the NASA photos and the numbers of veterans that are getting their memories back. It only takes 2 corroborating eyewitnesses to convict someone of murder. Why are we not being listened to? I mean, just because we sound weird.
Thank you, Penny.
Thank you for coming by and doing this.
Please consider supporting Super Soldier Talk by purchasing your own Neo Meditation device. Your Neo Meditation device will help you reduce stress, integrate trauma, enhance intuition, enhance clairvoyance, and enhance creativity. Get yours now at www.neologicaltech.com.